Hi, hello, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, those of you, the participants of this debate that are already here on Zoom, and also welcome to everybody that is listening and watching on the ILO YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and child labor looking forward in times of crisis, and of course, that is to mark the World Day Against Child Labor 2020. And it's quite obvious that this year we're meeting in a different fashion from the years before. You all have gotten used to the Zooms and the other technology get-together. So this is what we have chosen for 2020 as well. Wonderful you can all be with us. And before I introduce our distinguished panel and panelists, I'd like to say a couple of words of introduction. In 2017, some of you might have actually been there. There was the global conference on the sustained eradication of child labor, and the ILO had just released new facts and new figures on the size of the issue, and it was actually said that were an estimated 152 million children in child labor, half of them actually in hazardous work. Now, looking forward, next year is going to be declared by the UN the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. And during that year, ILO and Unicef are going to be cooperating even more than they're doing already. And they're also going to put out new estimates on the size of the problem. This year will next year bring about opportunities, and that's also a stepping stone towards one more year in the future. 2025 has been actually set as a goal, as a target by the world community under the goal of 8.7 of the SDGs, as trying to get rid of all forms of child labor. Now, that is, of course, ambitious, but maybe not unachievable. But as you all know, COVID-19 has brought about an economic and also in some parts a social crisis, the extent of which we can only estimate. And there was a little progress in the last couple of years, and we were all very happy about that. But right at the moment, we're not quite sure whether there will be a standstill or whether there definitely be a reversal of this progress. Now, having said all this, I would just like to introduce the absolutely splendid panel that we have here. And then if you say hello, then we can all see you in live and in color and a little bit bigger. So, Guy Ryder, ILO Director General, thank you very much for joining us from your office.
Thanks, Connie. Hello to everybody. Great to be here.
Lovely. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director, Unicef. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, Connie. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And to India, Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Laureate. Hi.
Hi, namaste, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Anousheh Karvar, live from Paris, Chair of the Alliance 8.7. Anousheh, you're here? You're with us?
Oh, sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you.
Great, fantastic. We have from Costa Rica, the Minister of Labor. Fantastic. Janina Dinarte. Wonderful you're with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Roberto Suarez Santos, Secretary General, International Organization of Employers. Happy to have you on board.
Great to join you all here. Looking forward for this discussion.
Sharon Barrow, Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. Sharon, happy to have you here.
Good morning, good afternoon, and it's nice to have a chance to talk about what is still one of the greatest scourges on humanity. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Last but not least, somebody who is a tiny little bit nervous, but who's going to actually share something very important. Julius Battaglia, He is a youth advocate and he was formerly in child labor. Today he's working as a volunteer with the NGO Uganda Women Efforts to Save Orphans. Thank you very much for joining us from close to Kampala.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to participate in this conference representing all the activists. Thank you.
So today UNICEF and ILO got together, well actually they got together a couple of weeks ago and said we have to look at the situation of child labor in and under and during COVID-19 and especially the probable outcomes. So a study has been released exactly on the dot on the 12th of June. This morning it has already brought about a couple of headlines and it would be lovely, Guy, if you could highlight a couple of the important issues that you consider very necessary for everybody to know.
Well, thanks, Connie, for this opportunity. And let me try to outline what I think the key messages of this ILO UNICEF report are. Let's just situate the situation. We have made good progress in respect of child labor over the last 2 decades. There are 94 million less child laborers today than there were 20 years ago. Progress has been slowing up a bit. But the message in our report is that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there is real danger that this progress could be not only stopped, but possibly reversed. And why is that? Well, because this pandemic has brought a dramatic social and economic crisis. We've seen the equivalent of 305 million full-time jobs destroyed in the first half of this year. We've seen an enormous growth in poverty as a consequence. And the figures show that when poverty goes up by 1%, the probability is that child labor will go up by 0.7%. So you can see the problem in those figures. How is this working out? Well, we're seeing people being driven into informal working as lockdowns take place. And we know that the informal economy is a hotbed, as it were, of child labor. We're seeing the interruption of education with schools closing, and I'm sure Henrietta can tell us more about that. So this is something like a perfect storm. And as we go forward, and even when lockdowns begin to lift, people will be struggling to make a living, particularly in the absence of any effective social protection. And I think as things do get moving again, there's a real danger that people in great difficulty will have increasing resort to child labor. And this could take us in the wrong direction. And there's all sorts of supporting conditions to add to this storm. A fall in remittances from migrants, credit constraints, contraction of trade and investment, pressure on public budgets. So it's a gloomy outlook. But I think the bottom line of our report, and I'll finish with this, Connie, is there is real danger in all of this, but there is no fatality. Nothing is inevitable. And our report finishes with a call for the right choices of action to be made so that in this time of crisis, we do act in the right way. So that, I think, is the big picture of the report.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And we're going to, of course, be talking about the right choices, which ones should be taken, which ones are maybe low-hanging fruit. Henrietta, of course, Unicef was co-authoring this report, and you probably have a couple of other aspects that are close to your heart that you want us to know.
Thank you very much, Connie, and it's a pleasure to be here with Guy on the World Day Against Child Labor. This is an important day for all of us. It is a time when we can come together in unity and to speak with one voice against this practice. In the last 2 decades, we have shown that when we unite against child labor, it can make a difference. We can make a difference. So as Guy said, we've made some progress. We have 94 million fewer children that are in child labor, but we also have some real warning signs ahead of us. We are reminded by this report that for the first time in 2 decades, we are likely to face an unimaginable increase in child labor, including in its worst forms. As most of you know, we have more than 1 billion children who are out of school. The COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented measures on school closures, lockdowns, dwindling household income, losses of one or both parents to the COVID-19, and families under stress. It creates those conditions. So it's likely to translate into more children who are undertaking risky, exploitive, harmful forms of work to help their families make ends meet. Children are already engaged in child labor, and they are likely to face longer working hours and even riskier working conditions. Girls are going to be especially vulnerable to exploitation, including in domestic work and in agricultural work, putting them at a much higher risk of sexual and gender-based violence. Like families, governments too are going to be faced with difficult choices to shift social spending on health, protection, education, and welfare to economic stimulus instead, a move that will probably make more children even more vulnerable to child labor and exploitation. So UNICEF believes that governments can strike a balance as they stimulate economic growth through and beyond the pandemic, while also upholding children's rights and continuing our work to end child labor. So first, by strengthening investments to support child rights in health, protection, and education, any country's economic growth depends on a healthy, educated, and skilled workforce. This is something that Guy Ryder and I have been talking about everywhere, but it's very important that we remind everyone in the world that this is what we need and we must have. It also depends on children being protected at all times from exploitation and abuse, and thus program investments in human capital represent the best and the most sustainable path to lasting economic growth and stability for every country. And second, by using the pandemic as an opportunity to introduce policies and programs that prevent child laborers from returning to work. Children belong in school, not in a workplace. With businesses closed, we have a new opportunity to keep these children away from the workplace and return them to school where they belong. When schools reopen, they should do so safely with benefits like school feeding programs so families do not have to rely on child labor. And third, lastly, by strengthening the social safety nets that families need, governments can help. This includes cash transfers to help families make ends meet, strengthen social services overall. It means safe return to work provisions for adults that Guy Ryder and ILO speak about often, as well as family-friendly workplace policies that help parents care for children. Families should not have to resort to child labor to make ends meet. By making the right policy and investment choices now, governments can ensure that COVID-19 response does not become at the expense of the progress in ending child labor. So in closing, UNICEF is proud to stand with our partners at ILO and around the world as we help governments make child labor a thing of the past. Thank you, Connie.
I had just switched off my microphone because there was a helicopter circling out there, so one can really feel your emotion that stand behind the figures and the issues. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, there is one big part where especially exploitation of children takes place. That's agriculture. The figures tell us that 7 out of 10 children are actually working in the fields, they're fishing or they're herding. And so it is not astonishing that one big partner in the effort is the Food and Agricultural Organization. And we have a video message from this key partner now. I'd like to invite you all to watch with us the video message from Chu Dong-yu, the Director General of the FAO.
Today, we come together to jointly mark the World Day Against Child Labor. Child labor is widely spread in agriculture and it needs to stop. At the same time, we must be mindful about what is not child labor. Undertaking safe and age-appropriate tasks for limited hours on the farm while still attending school can help children to acquire important skills and enable them to contribute to the livelihood of their family. Unfortunately, the work situation of about 110 million boys and girls in agriculture goes beyond what is acceptable. 70% of all child labor is found in agriculture, and poverty is the main reason. While crisis, conflict, disasters, and the impact of climate change have increased the economic dependency of many vulnerable small-scale farmers on child labor, the current COVID-19 pandemic can further push children into child labor. 2025 is the deadline set in the 2030 agenda to eliminate all forms of child labor. Today, I have launched the FAO framework on anti-child labor in agriculture. With this framework, we intend to harness the potential FAO's work to help reduce child labor, and we want to set an example for other actors in the world of agriculture. Agriculture and food security related policies, programs, and investments need to also address the root causes of child labor. Governments, development banks, and the private sectors can increase the outreach and the scale of the child labor sensitive programs and investments in agriculture. Let us all together do more and do it fast so that the children who are now left behind get a chance to be educated, healthy, and skilled producers and workers in the future.
Yes, you've just heard Chudong Yu has also pointed out that we must try to eradicate the root causes if we actually want to get there by 2025. And let me just express our gratitude. On the left-hand side, I sort of see what's going on YouTube, and the questions come flooding in. So we better get a move on to actually bring the whole panel in. And let me turn to Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Peace Laureate first. Kailash, we all know that you've been engaged in fighting for children, for their liberty, for their livelihoods, for their education for decades. So seeing COVID-19 and the effects it has, what would you advise? Kailash, I think you've muted your microphone.
Sorry.
Which was very kind of you, but now we need to hear you.
Sorry about it. I said that every day is a day against child labor for me in last 4 decades. But this World Day Against Child Labor is most important for all of us, because it is like a wake-up call. Whatever choices we make, whatever actions we take, are going to determine the future of the entire generation. And that's why we need bolder leaderships in all walks of life, right from the national governments to the international community, civil society, and everyone. This also requires much more compassion amongst us. And the most important is the sense of urgency. I recall when I was freeing a girl from circus who was trafficked from Nepal to India. She was 15-year-old, enslaved, raped several times, asked me this. She said, "You are talking about going back to schools and join education, but it is too late for me. It is too late for many, many children in the world, and we cannot afford it." And therefore, we are demanding as a group of Nobel laureates and other world leaders that there must be a fair share for the most marginalized people and particularly the children. Guy Ryder, Sharon, and myself are among those 88 people who have made this appeal, and that included 45 Nobel laureate and 20 former prime ministers and president and others. We strongly demand that at least 20% or 1 trillion must go for taking care of vulnerable children in the world. $5 trillion were announced by the richest countries. And if 1 trillion goes, we can definitely address the problem, the crisis which we are all facing. And that is not too much to ask. It is the question of setting the priority. And as Guy said, this is the time to make the right choices. That is something which my organization, Global March, my foundation, and the Young People's Group 100 Million campaign is demanding for. Youth are asking everywhere that give us fair share so that children are not left behind and they should not be more vulnerable due to this pandemic. Governments have to show leadership and make sure that the money goes for the betterment and protection of children who need it most. Unfortunately, what we are seeing now that the richest countries are prioritizing their own companies or other multinational companies to bail out. But how can you afford that your children are falling into these situations and many more children will fall into it? So fair share for children is our demand. And we are also asking every government everywhere in the world that the same formula should be implied when they are going to put any resource, any budgetary allocation or any fund for COVID-19 response. My parameter is simple and clear that any government, if does not spend money on the children now, then they are not going to show their leadership, visionary leadership at least. They have to prioritize the children in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailash. Again, it needs money, but maybe it also needs other aspects in order to get traction. And therefore, I'm very happy that we have many different voices here now. We know that the Alliance 8.7 is the global partnership to catalyze action to achieve Sustainable Development Goal Target 8.7. And the Anousheh Kava is the chair of the Alliance 8.7. You've been in your office now for more than a year. So you've been in office in a time when we were hit by COVID-19. From your point of view, how do you see the Alliance acting in response to the pandemic?
Thank you very much for your invitation. It is very important to say that the pandemic has dramatically revealed within a few months tremendous gaps in income security, universal access to public health, to education, food security, social protection all over the world. And in this context, the crisis is a dramatic challenge. It is also an opportunity to review policy responses and the way they will affect the most vulnerable, especially young boys and girls. In this context, we know that children suffer most from a combination of loss of their family's livelihood and temporary school closures that can become permanent if no compensation measures is taken. This combination can end to a rise of child labor, and this is a major concern for the Alliance 8.7 As you mentioned, the Alliance is a global partnership gathering towards the same target, namely eradication of child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery. And we succeeded very rapidly to take advantage of our multi-stakeholder structure and task governments, international organizations, international social partners and businesses, NGOs and academy, and task each group with specific actions to address and mitigate the adverse consequences of the pandemic and pave the way towards progress. In this issue, governments have major responsibility to provide special protection measures to target children, especially boys but also girls, through recovery programs. International social partners, they must ensure a business continuity and protect the rights of the workers and their families, in particular children and the elderly, through social dialogue. CSOs, NGOs, by advocating the need of affected groups, they help us monitoring whether responses can reach the affected groups. And international organizations are there to facilitate dialogue, cooperation, and technical assistance. And last but not least, academies helps us to generate knowledge and data about this crisis. Finally, and yet importantly, our response strategy to the COVID-19 crisis is strongly grounded in the engagement with Pathfinder countries. There are 21 right now, and the full support we bring to them to take accelerated and visible measures to transform their commitments into action. So our global partnership, in a very quick time, spoke in one voice and delivered a joint statement. We issued it 10 days ago, and this will be our common roadmap for the coming month. We stand ready to support all our stakeholders, in particular our Pathfinder countries, to accelerate action, to generate knowledge about the crisis, share good and new practices, including preventive measures under the COVID outbreak, but also redouble our efforts for additional human and financial resources, and reinvigorating all our action groups and working groups on this issue. We strongly believe that the resort to child labor cannot serve as a coping strategy in response to the crisis. It is essential to prevent it to occur, and the Alliance 8.7 is fully engaged to foster commitment in this respect, with a sharpened focus on universal access to education and to social protection, including in-cash transfers to families, to address root causes of child labor. Pathfinder countries have already started to show the way forward in this regard, and I'm sure they will be inspiration for others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anushi. And we're just going to be talking to one of the Pathfinder countries and hear from Janina Dinate, the Minister of Labor from Costa Rica, what they're doing at the moment. And of course, you know, in the tripartite system of the ILO, you have more on board. So let's kick off with the governments. Janina, not only have you started to be a Pathfinder country, but you wanted to go further and faster. In the report that was published today, there were also a couple of issues how crises in the past were tackled and certainly locally overcome. So without an inroad into having more child labor. What are you doing right at the moment?
Thank you, Connie, and thank you for the invitation. Well, first of all, I would like to say that Costa Rica is a very small country, but we are committed with huge goals. For example, we eliminate the army, we are committed to decarbonization, and now we are committed to eradicate child labor. And I think this is part of our commit with the world, because we understand that we have to make important changes in our society. Costa Rica has committed to the eradication of child labor as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. To achieve this end, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security has worked in close collaboration with the private sector, with civil society, to raise awareness about this issue. Actually, the ministry has partnered with other institutions to provide the children and many adolescents the opportunity to continue their educational path and to improve their living conditions through cash transfers programs and social support to their families. Moreover, the government has established institutional mechanisms to enforce the laws and regulations in terms of child labor. And actually, we are very committed with measures because we really understand that we need the data to make decisions. But in this context, when we know that COVID has terrible effects in our economy and the incomes of family, we have to make another decisions. For example, the first decision is that we are increasing our committed against child labor. And it means that we have to keep all of our institutional efforts, and we decide to not cancel any transfer support for people. For example, we have different programs like scholarships, even when kids are not going to school. Food for children in poverty conditions, cash transfers to childcare, cash transfers to keep children away from the labor market. And this is possible, for example, because of our investment in education. We invest 8% of our GDP in education, and we have very strong programs in terms of social security. Even when the institutions have reduced their budget because of the emergency, the efforts goes oriented to not affect the services and the support for families and children. Other factor that is very important for us is that as country, we have decided, or we have implemented different many instruments, policy instruments that were approved over the time. And those turn into state policies with a long-term vision. And I think this is very important to confront or to face this crisis. Nowadays, the emergency have very important economic and social consequence on the labor market and the family incomes. But for those reasons, we must emphasize on the urgent necessity to strengthen actions and strategies. I would like to say that we have developed some special programs in this moment for the emergency. For example, we developed the program that we call Proteger. It's a monetary transfer, a cash transfer for families. All those people who were affected by COVID-19 in terms of their labor situation. This transfer goes for 3 months to every person who has been affected. And actually, it's not just for formal labor. We decide to orient the support for people in informality. So what's the strategy for Costa Rica? Well, I have to say that our strategy combines at least 4 mechanisms. The first one, the long-term universal policies that we have implemented as free and obligatory public education and universal access to health services. Second, focused policies for children and their families when they live in poverty conditions with access to complementary scholarships, food services, or childcare. Third, social precision policies. And I think this is very important. Social precision policies for people under higher risk, identifying their vulnerability factors to orientate the resources to avoid their presence in hazardous activities or working illegally. And of course, measuring the local incidence to pretend to carry out the institutions to reinforce the attention. And the fourth is reinforce the work with employers, with the employees, organizations, civil society organizations, and to make a path together. And I think this is very important. And the last thing, to finally finish my first intervention, is to say that we have had a very good experience in the regional initiative, Latin American Caribbean Free Child Labor, because we have many countries committed with these efforts, and we have recognized that this relation and this alliance really give us a support, and it's complementary to maximize the local efforts that we have done in Costa Rica. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janina. And for the sake of our timekeeping, we are sort of running a bit late with every statement getting longer and longer and longer, which is quite obvious because the issue is so important. But we want to answer as many questions as there are. And I tell you what, on the stream on YouTube, there are a hell of a lot of questions. So let's turn to Roberto and then to Sharon. Roberto, of course, you're representing not the informal but the formal sector of employment as Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. Roberto, there's always the question, what do employers exactly do as far as children in COVID-19 is concerned? And there's already, and I want to slot that in, the question of, are you actually sort of pinpointing humanitarian assistance considering working children and their families? That's sort of one of the questions that you might want to answer straight away.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity of being here. Yes, we're representing the more than 50 million companies that are linked to our federations in the formal economy, but informality, the huge informality that we have in front of us, 60% of total occupied population in the world, is affecting in a way or in another, with its reality of child labor, the way the formal economy is operating. So the link with the formal and informal is really essential, especially in some developing economies. I have to say that all of a sudden, in less than some days, we have all redressed our approach as business and employee organization towards the emergency, towards also the social and economic, devastating social and economic consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, which are closely linked to a reality of employment, but which are also closely linked to a humanitarian reality, especially in some countries, and also to the child labor. I think that you gave us, Guy and also Henrietta, important figures on how we have been making progress, but also important figures related to the risky situation of reversal that we cannot allow. If there is an objective, if there is an SDG in which we cannot allow any kind of reversal, is SDG 8.7. We have been strongly focusing during this period in ensuring business continuity, in ensuring also liquidity for companies, especially to small and medium companies, not because of the sake of having this liquidity, but because of the consequence that this will have on employment and at the end on supply chains. Let me also give the figure. I mean, when ILO launched the figure related to job losses, we asked and we obtained, and we thank the ILO, the figure related to companies that are affected. And we are talking about at least 436 million enterprises that are currently facing high risk of serious disruption. Never before we have a need for family-friendly policies for return to work, but never before we have had such huge risks in global supply chains. We have been working intensively in the garment sector with ITUC, with other global unions, with brands and retailers in the initiative for call to action, precisely to tackle or try to tackle the risk, humanitarian risk that will lead also to a high exposition of child labor in this sector. We try to mobilize funds, and we think that we'll manage in the short term to mobilize some funds precisely to assure not just business continuity, but also employee support. But at the end of the day, also, we try to look at the future, and the future, and I say that as a business person, needs to be looked in a different manner. We need to assure also that we have some sustainable safety nets, and also we look at social protection frameworks that are really functioning in very difficult scenarios in the informal economy, or not just in the formal economy, in developing economies, to provide precisely the basis for a different or a better normal. I also have to say that the Alliance 8.7 is not just a great initiative, it's the initiative that needs to be strengthened at the maximum. And I want also to thank for the excellent leadership of the French government, and also to Unicef for that. I think that we need to strengthen the ambition on the implementation part of the alliance. We really need to do better, much better, to have some deliverables and some results. We have been working as IOE with some experience in Mexico. Now we are also working with the UN Global Compact in 6 African countries precisely to tackle some issues related to informality and at the end to child labor on global supply chains. But at the end of the day, beyond these specific initiatives, what we want to change is the policy. That's what we are good at as employer organization, as global employer organization. Our main partners all around the world are the ones that are sitting together with the governments in order to have the right setting of family-friendly policies, of educational policies, of fight against corruption policies. And if we do not much better in the real short term, we will not also take the opportunity that this COVID-19 is bringing to us. I would stop here because I think that's the main message I want to pass. Count on the strong commitment of the business community that IOE represent. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. And also just sticking to time. Sharon, what has changed from your perspective due to COVID-19? We've just heard the DG saying that for one loss in jobs, we have 0.7 probability higher of child labor. So these are threatening numbers. And we've just heard that there is a difference between the informal and the formal sector. And we've also heard that agriculture is one of the hotbeds for child labor. Now, it seems a hell of a lot to tackle, and now we still have COVID-19. Where do we need to start first?
Well, I think you've heard people give you the figures, Connie, so I'm not going to go over that in the interest of time, but it's frightening. Let me just say it's frightening. You know, modern slavery is still a scourge on our humanity, and child labor sits at the very heart of this dehumanizing exploitation. We haven't eliminated this atrocity to date, and you've got to ask why. And in the face of those recovery plans and building resilience so that our world is a better place in terms of putting people, the planet, and the economies on an alignment, then, you know, the protection of children has to sit at the heart of that. So there are 3 actors. It's that simple. There are governments, and if they're not prepared to invest in schools, child protection, and decent work, but also compliance against those who use child labor, then I don't know how far we can go. Because who's in jail for using child labor? I can't name 5 people in the world. Kailash, I don't know if you can do better, but why not? This is a crime against humanity. When I listen to Costa Rica, I feel optimistic. And thank you, Minister, because indeed, there's no doubt that Anusha and the French government and others are champions of this, but you're actually making it happen on the ground. And the 3 elements that you talked about, not just child protection, but indeed resourcing families and universal access to both health and education, but also to social protection, ending informality in terms of the division, that's fantastic. And your commitment to social dialogue and actually demanding that workers and employers with the government actually tackle this question is exactly where Roberto was going, where Guy you know, stands on the pedestal every day about, and we can only commend you, but we want it everywhere. And I know with Anusha's leadership, that's going to be much more of an optimistic story. I want to tell you what Anusha is doing on another front that's absolutely fundamental. It's universal social protection. Do you know in the $10 trillion spend today, 37 trillion could get us 5 years of universal social protection for the poorest countries, health, income, and other vital services. We can do this. That will put a floor under a capacity to eliminate the temptation for people to send their children to work. The second, indeed, actor is corporations. We have a promise from the EU. Thank you for mandated due diligence. If companies aren't actually analysing where the risk is, if they're not involving key actors in the country, indeed ourselves and others, then you've got to ask why not. You can throw money at it, and we say this to corporations, but if you've got child labour in your supply chains, you should be acting not just on a moral basis, but on a legal basis. So mandated due diligence. And I'm proud to say there are companies working with unions in the field of transport, of agriculture, and so on. You were going to ask me what you do about agriculture, then get the unions involved as warning signs. And that doesn't mean just formal unions. It means groups of community citizens watchers in those informal economies as well. And the third one's international institutions. We're talking about the 8.7 Alliance, but we need a global determination with communities everywhere. So when it comes to, and I'll answer one of your questions to get it out of the way, what do we do about agriculture and the informal economy? Then indeed, I would say go back to the ILO Centenary Declaration. We've demanded a new social contract in order to build recovery and resilience. That new social contract is fundamental. The SDGs sit at the heart of it. And indeed, when you look at what it said, a labour protection floor under all work, informal as well as formal. It said marry it with universal social protection. Costa Rica again, great example. French's leadership, but other nations. And then we want essential public services. Never again can we stand back and say we're not going to fund adequately our schools, our health systems, our care sector. So we know the answers, Connie, we absolutely know the answers. Have we got the will as a global community to make it happen? That's the question.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And I know that the issue as such is not new. We have the added pressure of COVID-19, and we try to turn the table on a potential degradation of the situation. Now, I'm very, very happy to introduce Julius to you. Julius Battaglia. He is a youth advocate now. He was in child labor as a youngster. In fact, you were an orphan, and then your auntie took you away. And Julius, share your story with us, please, so that we actually understand that we're not just talking about people that are in child labor, but with people in child labor.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this conference. Here is my story. I lost my mother at 4 years of age. At 13 years, I was forced to work in a rice field garden from 7 a.m. up to 7 p.m., staying hungry, thirsty, and lonely. My work was carrying birds. I would use a jerrycan, and as well, I would carry heavy baskets. I would admire going to school while seeing my friends going to school, but I had no hope because I had no one supporting me. I was also eaten by insects that changed my hands and my body. Late after 2 years, a village health team came and picked me up, then linked me to Uganda Women's Effort to save orphan. That is the USO that decided to support me from primary. Then from primary, I joined secondary, and I was struggling while studying. I could go to 3 days to school, then the 2 days I go for work, because they were just supporting me with scholastic materials, and yet I had to look for school fees. From there, I joined Nzam's Training Institute of Social Development. I did a course in social work and social development, and I'm now currently working with USO as a community-based trainer who is struggling in the communities and working hard to ensure that children are protected from child labor. And my work is I counsel children, I follow up from home to home, I move household wife footing. I also mobilize and train village savings and loans association, those parents such that they can access money to support their groups and support their children. And I also make referrals. Whether a case is beyond me, I make a referral. And I also identify more cases, I make a referral. Thank you, that's my story. And I say, protect children from child labor now and forever. Me, I'm committed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we wish you really a lot of strength to continue your work. Actually, before I address Guy and Kailash, Henrietta, we're just at the issue of the voice of the children who have been in child labor. How do you actually make sure that in your programs these voices are heard and they are sort of part and parcel of the solution?
Well, that's just it, Connie. We want all of the young people's voices to be heard, and voices like Julius are very powerful. It will change ministers' minds, and it will change the minds of business people. It will change society. So we've got a lot of programs, You Report among others, and we encourage every young person who can help us to be like Julius, tell the story, get onto our systems for SMS, for television, radio. All of this helps. So bring out the voice of the young. Thank you.
Thank you. So we also need sort of these World Days in order to focus attention. Being, of course, a journalist, it's something that gives bigger attention, especially when there is a lot around to draw the focus away. Let's keep on the track with Kailash and Guy. Now, what we've seen, Kailash, especially when the big cities closed down, you know, all these people going back to rural areas, a lot of kids as well. Guy, we've seen it all around the world happening, that there was a sort of migration movement almost away from the big cities. Now, that brings about, of course, pressure for the rural areas and the likelihood that kids might not go back to a school situation. So, Guy, from your point of view, and then Kailash, from your point of view, how do we tackle that? Guy, maybe first?
If I go first, okay, thanks. Well, one thing is very, very clear. The migrant populations, migrant workers and their families have been amongst the most severely hit by this crisis. Now, how does this relate to child labour issues? Well, you know, where migrant children are with their families and with the working parents, and those parents have been displaced from the labour market and may not have access either to social protection or indeed education in case of the children, then those children are very, very vulnerable to being pushed into child labour simply as a survival tactic. And this is what we are seeing. Second point around migration is where remittances are cut off. We know that very large parts of the developing world in particular rely very heavily on remittances. And clearly in this crisis, we've seen a dramatic fall in remittances. And this is going to push up the risk of child labour. We saw it in the financial crisis, for example, with Mexican workers in the United States. It's a little bit more ambiguous when migrant workers return to their families. One thing is they could actually displace their children from work, which would be a positive thing. But the other thing is actually they could work together and actually expand household economic activity. So it's a complex set of issues. But what to do about it? It's to provide migrant workers with the same types of protection, particularly social protection, that we would expect for any other segment of the population, about equal treatment.
And Kailash, what's your view on it? Kailash, can you hear me? Yes.
In addition to losing their jobs and their financial crisis, once they are returning back from cities and towns, they feel hopeless, helpless. They are losing the spirit which is responsible for building the cities and towns and all kind of civilization and development. And that is a big loss, the loss of their spirit. So we have to ensure that how compassionate, how respectful is the society, especially the governments, with these people and the police and other agencies. I feel that first of all, we must ensure their food. This should not convert into a huge hunger pandemic. So some sort of direct cash transfers are needed, and that could also be linked with the education. So it can become more a kind of conditional education incentive, cash transfer incentive. So that is one way of doing it. In India, we have seen the good results of employment guarantee schemes, as well as the school feeding programs, what we call the midday meals, with dozens of millions of children being helped through that. So I think these examples also from other countries should be strengthened and expanded, and the money should be available for that. And that's why I was talking about 20% fair share should go to these vulnerable people and particularly children. And I would also feel that if we have to prevent the further enslavement and child labor, as well as trafficking, it is important that easy loans should be made available by the state banks, easy and simple, so that they can get money instead of borrowing money from the money lenders, and then they fall into the trap of intergenerational bonded labor and slavery. So this is the second thing. And the last thing I would suggest that we have to find the ways of revival and reinvigoration of the traditional livelihoods in the villages, as well as how to bring jobs in the small villages and the middle level villages, so that people can get the jobs. But that is a big risk involved in it, that the supply chain could reach the middlemen and the contractors and recruiters. And instead of bringing the children and adults to cities and towns through trafficking, they can go and set up their establishments there. So it is very necessary that the labor inspector systems and social vigilance and social audit should go on, and it should be made sure that these children are not employed in the supply chain, which may occur in their in the doorstep in their villages. So some of these things could be useful, but again, we have to ensure that during this crisis, the children should be fed. If they are not attending a school, and the 370, as we are referring, children are highly depending, or their families were depending on the school feeding programs, and the schools are closed, and the long closure always result in the massive dropout, and that has been seen in the strikes in Argentina or Ebola in Liberia and so on. So we have to ensure that the money should be transferred, and food guarantee should be ensured for children, so that in these times and later on they can come back to schools.
Thank you very much, Kailash. I will now quote the person who's actually put the question out, and I think that's to Anushe. It's from Silvana Cappuccino from the Italian General Confederation of Labor, and she's referring to the fact that Alliance 8.7, all the social partners, civil society, government, is all under one belt. But the question is, how will the Alliance measure progress or lack thereof and ensure accountability of those responsible for new cases of child labor?
Thank you very much for this very important question. It is true that the quick spread of the crisis across the globe requires close monitoring in relation to the impact it has on target 8.7. And we want the Alliance to fully play its role in monitoring the crisis. But the other major challenge, and Roberto Suarez explained it to us, is about implementation and instruments designed to measure this implementation, in particular with our 21 Pathfinder countries. For us, these two purposes, better understanding the ongoing crisis and better measuring progress in implementation, have made us set three instruments. The first one is a reporting process. Our Pathfinder countries from all regions of the world have already started showing the way forward. And last July, in the framework of the high-level political forum of the UN ECOSOC, the forum that measures progress in the SDGs achievement on a yearly basis, we were happy to deliver the first edition of the Pathfinder Digital Report. It included reports from 9 Pathfinder countries. The second edition this year in mid-July will include 13 out of the 21 Pathfinder countries, with a special focus on the response to the economic and social situation created by the pandemic. So this is one instrument. The second one is about streamlining transparency and accountability in all our actions. Accountability is a constant consideration for governments, especially Pathfinder ones. It is a major concern of international social partners and NGOs. They are very demanding on this issue, and I can only commend them for this. COVID-19 has made us more aware of the need for closer coordination on data collection and studies to monitor the implementation of the 8.7 SDG target. The third instrument we're putting forward is producing global updated data. We believe that sound policies require sound data and analysis, and the forthcoming Alliance Global Estimate on Child Labor is planned for mid-2021. The ILO and the Unicef are co-custodians of indicator SDG 8.7 on child labor, and more than 100 database sets on child labor are under processing right now. These indicators that will be produced include child work, child labor, hazardous work, household chores that children perform for their own households, domestic work by children in third-party households. So these estimates will be followed by a global report, which will present current challenges and policies with a strong regional focus, and a particular attention will be given to vulnerabilities to child labor on the basis of following current research tracks, crisis situation. There is not only COVID, but also climate change, conflict areas, discrimination, informal work, and rural economy. With these three instruments, we are working hard to maximize our collective action in order to be up to this tremendous task. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushe, for that. I think we sort of, I'm looking at the time, and of course, as ever in these debates, it's very tough to do that. Now, let me go to Janina, as if the lady had already known what you were going to say in your statement earlier. Ariel Arrozeres from Argentina pointed out that with the global pandemic and with your regional response that you've pointed out, it's still necessary that governments implement the policies, that it just doesn't sort of stay, you know, nice words, but nothing happening on the ground. So in extension to her question, I would really like to ask you, how do you convince your fellow ministers that that is the right area where you need to invest your resources, be it financial, be it really people-wise?
Yes, I think it's a very good question, because what I have to say as minister is that it's a good investment. For example, if we invest in children to avoid them to get into labor market, we're investing into guaranteeing a better society and a better country. And what can I say? Why I'm saying this? Well, because if we have children in schools, we know that those children in the future are going to have a better future, and they're going to be better, and it reflects in better social conditions. We can see it in better economic conditions. For example, we can increase our productivity as country, but also we can see the economic growth coming from the knowledge and the experience that people have when they go to school. So I think it's a good decision for governments to invest and to commit with this with these efforts that we have to do to try to eliminate and to eradicate child labor. I have to say that we have very good results as country, and we have made decisions over the years, and now we are seeing the results, and we are expecting to increase our commitment, because we know that we just have 13,000 children, and we have to go faster, and we have to do our best to try to eradicate completely the child labor.
Thank you so much. And when I was just not attentive to your last word, it was just to say we've just got 5 minutes more, but that doesn't mean that you should speak longer. It just means that we can have a bit more of a discussion. Roberto and Sharon, again, Sharon, we've heard a lot of the demands already, and I think I shared one of the questions from a lady in Nepal, like what shall we do with people in the areas outside Kathmandu, outside of the capital, where things are hidden, where traditions are there, that children war working along. How would you suggest, do we come to grips with the issue of child labor in areas that might not be touched by modern technology and therefore by our messages that quickly?
So if you actually allow communities, workers, to actually band together in support of the children in their villages, in their homes, but you provide them with the schools and the opportunity, and at the same time, you provide decent work for their parents, then you eliminate the scourge of child labor. No parent doesn't want the best for their children. Any parent acting in this regard is actually acting for survival. And there are very few exceptions to that. So if a parent has enough income, universal social protection income, if the public services are there, including education, health, childcare, then the opportunities for actual development as a whole for the community, but for individuals to have the life they should have as children and young adults. That's the answer. But it will take the international community, as Kailash said, but we can have the dialogue, listening to the aspirations and the needs of those communities if we're respectful of how to support what those communities want for themselves and for their children.
Thank you, Sharon. And on the way to asking Roberto a question that had already come up earlier, I just want to say, Julius, you've got fans on YouTube. Everybody said how brave you were to share your story. So the big thanks comes from the community on YouTube. Roberto, Elaine Mitchell-Hill from Business and Human Rights Lead at Marshalls PLC pinpoints to the fact that quite a number of businesses are actually in dire straits right now during the COVID-19 situation, and not every government has money to give away to save each and every business. So what can you do, what can businesses do that are already in a squeeze, to not forget about the ideals and necessities of protecting children?
Well, you're talking about the question, I can raise many angles, and I go to it quickly because I know that we are, on one side, you could say, well, there are different kind of business. I mean, you have the small and medium company in informal economy struggling for liquidity. But I believe that the question is raised, is much more thinking about global players that have their strong commitment on their supply chains, and also linked to the child labor challenge. I think that we have to bear into consideration two things first. First of all, in many of these global supply chains, the lack of liquidity is leading to a situation related to commitment to orders. I think that precisely the initiative that we took together with with many brands in the garment industry gave already some signs of how you remain committed, precisely because of the employment humanitarian angle that they raised, despite all the difficulties that liquidity has for these global players. But the other element which I want to raise, 10 years ago, and I'm saying 10 because next year we are having the commemoration, the anniversary of the UNG guiding principles for business and human rights. 10 years ago, I could say that the situation in terms of commitments from companies could not be the same. I think that we have a strong consensus and a strong strength in terms of commitment, which I agree with Sharon. It goes beyond an ethical commitment. I don't know whether that's legal or not legal, but it goes beyond an ethical commitment because it's linked to the expectations of society. That you can feel it. And that's, we are not talking about financing, liquidity. We are talking about commitment to the expectations that stakeholders have on the ground. And that's not disappearing. I feel it. We are dealing on a daily basis with companies. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's not disappearing. And we have to push this agenda. We, as IOE, we are celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. It's not the best year to celebrate, but at the same time, we are stick to our values, to our commitment, to our social fundamental principles, and that's the way forward. I believe so.
Thank you very much. And from this sort of, high level, let's go to the concrete example. Julius, can you share with us what you do at the moment in your work with Uganda Women Efforts to Save Orphans? And maybe in a minute?
Okay, thank you. At the moment, I'm currently counseling and guiding children who are being involved in child labor. I'm also trying to identify the children who are at risk of child labor, then also make referrals. I'm also trying to mobilizing and training community members in the village saving and organization, such that it can help them to access financial support their children. And I am also, I'm also making sure that I follow up on the teachers, whether they have connection with their children in the communities, because right now we're in a lockdown.
Thank you very much. You actually sort of also answered one of the implicit questions that I've seen here, because everybody says in the end, a lot of child labor is hidden. So following up, actually looking where it is and what you do about it. Thank you very much, Julius, for taking us along the road. Now, ladies and gentlemen, big challenge, short answers. I know you can do it. We have 5 minutes left, and I would like you to bring to the fore what you really think are the most important, maximum 2 issues that everybody should remember from this debate and take into the next year, and hopefully we'll stick to the numbers that we now have and are under 100 million people, young people, children in child labor. So maybe I do the other way around. Maybe I start with Anousheh. Shortly. Unmute.
Yes. I think the rule of law should be protected during the pandemic crisis and the recovery and the resort to the child labor is a breach to the rule of law. That is why I think our generation has a collective responsibility to change this, and this is my last word.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We look to Janina. The one thing we want people to know.
Yes, thank you. As Roberto said, I think this is part of an ethical discussion. I think we are in another moment of our history as humanity. Technology, consumers' expectations, business models, and product systems might confront us with a new opportunity to give children a new opportunity to have a better life. And I have to say two short things. We can seize the future of our children, and we need to work with the companies, but we have to understand that governments have to give them alternatives to finally achieve all the needs they have. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Kailash.
Thank you. I hope that this should not remain just the launch of a report or just observing the World Day Against Child Labor. The people who are sitting in front of me are the heroes, they are champions, and they have authority. So I strongly feel that if not you, who will do it? If not we do, who will do it? If it is not done now, then when we are going to exercise all our knowledge and all our experience and best practices in the future, that has to be done now. And finally, I would say that we need bold and urgent action with compassion, but equally important to maintain the unity. We have to do it collectively. The partnership is the key in solving these problems and the aftermath situation. And next year is a critical time when it's a great opportunity. So, Guy, your leadership, I'm ready to work to make that this year should be a very successful year, which can generate unprecedented political will and social mobilization. And finally, I would say that the children, the numbers whom we are talking about, they are not simply data. They are our children. They are our children. They are all our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Kailash. Now, 4 people, 4 minutes. I'm going to shut up now. Roberto.
We cannot allow ourselves a reversal in progress to eradicate child labor. Kailash, I agree entirely. Never before partnership has been so necessary. We have to do much better in partnership, not just us with the workers, but also with the international community. Work with business organizations, help us to help you. That's what I would say.
Grant. And Sharon, please. Unmute.
The rule of law, Anusha's right, social dialogue where everybody commits to solve the problem, and investment in children and social protection.
Wonderful. Thank you for being brief, which leaves Henrietta and Guy, but Henrietta first, please.
Thank you. So let's end child labor. Children belong in school, not in a workplace.
Fantastic. And means can be found in the report, but not just in the report, but everywhere. Guy, you have the last word.
That's well, I think today's message is that if we don't step up our effort, act with the urgency that Kailash has urged us to do, we will go backwards. This crisis will drive us backwards. So we are required, all of us, to make the right choices that are put out in the report that we have issued today. Step up our efforts, refuse to give up, refuse to be discouraged, so that we can actually live up to the commitments we've all made. Next year is International Year Against Child Labour. We've all committed to end this abuse by 2025. And if anybody is discouraged or wonders why we should do this, I think they should listen to Julius and his story and be inspired by what Kailash has done over a lifetime.
Thank you very much for that last word in the round. And all I can say is we have an overwhelming response from the community. We have more than 800 people that are actually signed in. And I would say by the speed that the questions come up here, at least 800 questions, they will be answered. Maybe not each and every one, but generically, they will be put together. Like, for example, what are ALO and Unicef actually going to do? How are they going to increase their cooperation for next year? What is the pathway? How would we need to allocate the money that Kailash is demanding or has demanded at the beginning? How contributions that have already been pointed out by everybody here, by the tripartite parties represented here, how they can bring everything forward. And of course, Alliance 8.7 is on the floor. Julius, we would like to see you again in one of the next debates with more time for your stories and for all the kids that are right at the moment already on the Twitter stream. You can see examples of who is out there, who has become a child champion after having been in child labor. So maybe the glass is half full, but all I know is that we need to continue all our efforts, that we need to coordinate the efforts in order to make the inroads that we need in order to have the data next year to be positive. So thank you very much for all your attention. Thank you very much, DG, for your time. I know that you're off running straight away, and have a good morning, day, evening, wherever you are. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Connie.
Okay.
Very good.
It's good.